Recording. Hello and welcome everyone. We're going to let the room fill up before we get started, but it's nice to see you, Paige. Nice to see you, Randy. Hello, Rowan. That's a new name. Beth, nice to see you in the room. Welcome. We are going to let the room fill up before we get started. Blair from New Zealand, nice to see you. Hey. Lynn, welcome. Darren, nice to see you. Welcome. I'm glad you figured it out and that you don't have to worry about your Zoom. We had a little conversation and email this morning. Let's see here. Deborah, nice to see you again. Oh, you're like my hero, Deborah. You have 18 motorcycles and you're the coolest. You're the coolest girl I know. I know, she's fantastic. Mike Mabry, nice to see you. Welcome into the room. We are going to let the room fill up a little bit more before we get started. We have 30 people registered, actually 31 people registered for the conference. Oh, there we go. There's some more coming in. Sometimes Zoom just doesn't let everyone in all at the same time. Oh, let's see. Gary, nice to see you. Welcome to the room. I am going to start us off by introducing our wonderful Rev Pro, Dave Moss. I have a little bit of a background with Dave. We are friends through our travels to New Zealand. Dave travels the world. I have only traveled to New Zealand for my work, but we met, what, a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago now? Yeah. Yep. And so a little bit of a background, so in case all of you were wondering how I know Dave and why I call him my friend. I have seen his presentation, I can't even tell you, probably 100 times now, and I still learn something new about myself and about setting up your motorcycle for you every time. So I'm so glad that you all could join us today. It's great to see you all in here. We are going to go ahead and get started, and as more people join the room, we will just tell them that, sorry that you missed the awesome introduction. Dave Moss is a guru on suspension and ergonomics and bike setup. And he's not just a self-proclaimed guru, but the world over knows him as the black magic artist when it comes to suspension. And he doesn't see it that way, but I'm gonna let him explain it to you all. So without further ado, my friend Dave Moss, thank you so much for doing this, for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brittany. Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here for this Rev Talks. And I hope one of several events that we can put together for you to come here the world over and learn something about you specifically and your motorcycle, and how together you can actually make that work far better for you. One of the disturbing statistics worldwide is that motorcycles generally seem to be in solo accidents, and a lot of those are on corner entry. So setup for a motorcycle is something that is a lifelong process. And I hope that by the end of this talk, inspire you to go make a difference with your motorcycle, even if it's something simple in regards to a change to make you more comfortable. And in doing that, that will start you on a lifelong journey in making a motorcycle yours. In the promotional material, what we talked about is, would you ever rent a car and never, and I mean never for the period of the rental, ever move the steering wheel or the seat? It's ludicrous, right? It doesn't make any sense. But unfortunately, with motorcycles, it's our culture to do quite the opposite, which means give it more power, buy an exhaust, get a power commander, map the engine, do something to make that bike go faster, and then adorn it with trinkets that clearly identify the motorcycle as ours. Now, in some cases, those trinkets may be functional, but in the majority of cases, they're unique to us because the bike needs to be identifiable to us. It is an extension of us. It is a piece of us. We're very emotionally attached to it. So in one of the promos we did back in New Zealand, I talked about how we can deal with your feelings and your emotions so that the dysfunctional relationship with your motorcycle begins to be resolved. And for many people, that was quite funny in the moment. But as time has gone by, riders understand that, because there's realistically a period of time where you are very in love with your motorcycle. And yes, I use that word because a motorcycle to us is a very personal connection. So Brittany is going to put up the first question, and you have 60 seconds, excuse me, to answer that question. And please answer it over the lifetime that you've been riding. So what we're looking for here is literally how many motorcycles have you owned? So if you're a brand new rider and you're on your first or second motorcycle, then the great thing about this is what you're going to learn today is going to dramatically change everything about your relationship with a motorcycle and how you fit yourself to it. If you've had quite a few motorcycles, then we've got some muscle memory in your brain that we need to go ahead and change. And if you've had a plethora of motorcycles, then we have some work to do, because that's going to take a while, not only to get through the motorcycles that you currently own, but also to configure the way you think about yourself and your motorcycle. So go ahead, click away on the survey. Let's see what answers we get. And the reason for this is very simple and straightforward. If you always adjust the steering wheel and the seat in a car, and you never adjust the motorcycle to you, then in essence, what we're being is collectively the biggest bunch of masochists on the planet. And we suffer a lot of pain. And those general pains are numb fingers, pain in our wrists, pain in our arms, pain in our shoulders and neck, and quite a bit of back pain. And because of that, historically, when we buy a motorcycle, we go through what I call the 100-year cycle, which is buy a bike, you love it, you ride the heck out of it. And then it kind of hurts a little bit, so you ride it less. And less meaning in time. Then it hurts more because you notice that. So you decrease the number of rides and you decrease the number of hours that you ride it. And then you reach a point of selling the motorcycle to go ahead and buy a new bike, because you need a new bike and it's going to be better. And when you buy the new bike, you ride the heck out of it. Eventually it starts to hurt. You ride it less for time. It hurts more, so you ride it less in time and number of rides, and you repeat the cycle. Now, up until 2000, realistically, bikes were not really adjustable. And because of that, where's our culture? What's our history here? Well, our history is shut up and take it, to be blunt. And in that unfortunate position, that's a legacy issue that comes through to us. Now, once 2000 came along and things became adjustable, that was really cool. It was great. I can change this, I can do this, I've got screws I can turn. But what do they do? So there became a little bit of confusion there in regards to what does this do? And unfortunately, when that all started, we on the road didn't get the education behind it to help us leverage those advantages. And the unfortunate part of that is it dropped off. So if you ride in the dirt, you do springs, you do oil, you do damping, you service everything, you fit it to yourself. If you bought a reasonably expensive bicycle, you go ahead and go through an excruciating fitment period where the shop or the person fitting you to the bicycle changes your pedals, cranks, changes your reach to the handlebars, changes everything. So you are biomechanically perfect. So the part there is, with the number of bikes you've owned in your lifetime, and we've got a pretty even spread here. The beauty of that is, as you go through each bike, we need to make changes. So let's start on the changes part. So I am very unusual. I have very stubby fingers compared to the size of my palm. If you look at your own hand, are your fingers like mine, short? Are your fingers equidistant to your palm? They're even. Or are your fingers longer than your palm? One of the things that manufacturers do, especially if we buy a budget motorcycle, is give us non-adjustable levers. So one of the problems there is that if the lever's too far away, what we do is put our hand like that on the bar, our thumb wraps underneath, and we have to go reach to go get the lever. Now, in doing that, every time we shift or every time we brake, we're physically steering. And if you repeat that motion while you're sat here watching, when you do that, what part of your shoulder works? Up here. And that obviously goes through to your neck. So a lot of the most common pains are from your hands moving because the shape of the levers does not fit the length of your fingers properly. So a lot of people might be riding like that, where their fingers are wrapped around the lever because it's too close to the handlebar. And if that's the case, when you're trying to finesse an action, that's not finesse. Unfortunately, if the lever rests right in your middle digit there, then there's really no sensitivity from your fingertips to understand what you're doing in terms of how much do I need to pull it back and can I release it gently. So levers are one of the biggest things where people struggle and actually get a lot of pain. And the other part they get a lot of pain for is that they ride like that. No OEM motorcycle at all is fitted to your hand size or your arm. And consequently, with that fitment, a lot of time you're here, or worse, when you go for the front brake, you have to pull your hand back, which means you're going to accelerate. And then you've got to lift your fingers up, and then you need to go and reach the lever. So the danger is with the throttle side for the front brake, you might stick the throttle on just a tiny bit while you go to brake. So the biggest thing, I don't care if you ride 8 hangers, you ride a standard motorcycle, or you're off-road, doesn't matter. But what we need is that straightness all the way down to your fingertips. So the good thing about brakes and clutches, for the most part, there are some exceptions, is that if you loosen the bolt or bolts holding that to the handlebar, it can rotate forwards and backwards. And with that rotation, instead of this, we can get that. What that means effectively is if you can do that, you just halved the time it took you to brake. That means your braking distance dramatically decreases, and there's zero risk because you're going forward of actually turning the throttle on and holding the throttle on and driving the bike forward while you're braking. In sitting on your motorcycle, and hopefully after today's presentation, you're straight out into the garage or wherever your bike is and grabbing some tools. Getting that straightness is critical. And getting that speed of motion forward is also really important. So jokingly, when I travel, I talk to people, would carbon fiber benefit you? Or would the correct clutch and brake lever be a better investment? And a lot of times, we all know that that carbon fiber is way better than that brake lever. It just is. It's stuff. It's that double bubble windshield that is perfectly shaped and contoured with the right tint. And we have to have that. And we will suffer in pain because we're riding like this. So at that point, can you get the cockpit correct? Now, the other part that's very important is we're all different heights. And if we're all different heights, then spine is one thing, arm length is the other. depending on that triangle, there's one other measurement that we never do. And that measurement is to go from your belly button to the center of the handlebar or the upper triple clamp, depending on whether you have a sport bike or a standard. When you fit on a bike, when you sit on a bike in a showroom, you know what feels comfortable. It is definitely subjective. You can sit on that bike and go, oh, this feels good, because it actually fits you. And that is your spine length, your reach with your hands, the whole 9 yards, your feet on the floor. So the part there that becomes really important is that should be your primary, and I mean primary criteria. And if it is, then that's great, because the battle of fatigue and pain and misery is about 30% over already. So now, Brittany, let's go ahead and have the second question, and let's take a look at what people are going to respond here. So given that I've gone through the ergonomics piece, how many of you have actually done something to make yourself comfortable? Now, that would also include the brake pedal placement in terms of angle up and down. It would also include the shift angle. So how does your foot fit the shifter? Because that angle is definitely very important. For women, that angle is generally steeper, especially if they wear heels, because they have greater flexibility in their ankle. So generally, I find that women prefer shifters that are down lower, because they have a natural extension to their ankle if they wear heels. So as we're all unique and we all have differences, setting the shifter, setting the height of the brake pedal, so when you go for it, you don't have to lift your foot up and put it on. How many of you have attacked that particular problem as well? Or are you doing what humans are by far the best things as? Adaptation. It is by far our best and worst quality. So look at that result. Isn't that encouraging? That's awesome. So may I quietly give you a golf ripple? Because for me personally, that's huge. And for those that have never done something, when you go through this, you're going to have an epiphany that will literally last you your whole life. And as soon as you get a new motorcycle, you will make that change right out of the gate. Or you will, if something can't be made right, go ahead and purchase the pieces you need to be able to get yourself set correctly. Now, to spend a little bit more time on the shifter itself, we all have different shoe sizes. So if we've got a size 14 down to a women's 3, the gap between the foot peg and the shifter is set from the factory, right? There's no adjustment backwards and forwards. So what we do is place our foot on the peg where we need it to be, so that we can use the part of our toe we want to shift. Getting that gap correct makes all the difference in the world, because if it's not, you are manipulating your body on the seat every single time you shift. And if you ride for an hour and you're up in the mountains and riding and having fun, what's that, a few hundred, maybe several hundred shifts? Obviously, if you commute all day and you commute on the freeway, your shifts are significantly less. But irrespective of that, one of my primary investments is buying just the shifter, the arm, with a slot in it, so I can put myself in exactly the right position I need to be, so that when I'm shifting, I am not moving my body to compensate at any time, because then I have to move my weight around on the bike to shift. The most unnatural part of that is when we get our ankle to come to above 90 degrees. We're not made that way biomechanically. We're just not. So this is normal. And then by the time we shift, we want to be more than 90 degrees, so there's no stress in our calf muscle here. So that's the other part to look for on ergonomics, because the bottom line is, if you are not comfortable, you're already building fatigue, and you're building fatigue because you're making your body adapt constantly. You are not able to relax. And that goes all the way back to the car seat and the steering wheel. Here's another challenge then. How many movements do you need to get into your car? 1 or 3? 1, straight in. 3, door, sit, pivot, locate. If that's you get in 3 notches, the car setup is wrong. Unless, of course, you have a 7-button memory seat, which you have perfectly set up for yourself. In which case, carry on. So if you get the ergonomics right, you're going to find that the bike is so much more pleasant to ride. And the primary part of that is the cockpit with the handlebars, the position of the bars forward or backward, your angle, and then your reach. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward. There are a ton of videos out there on ergonomics, so you can Google me and that topic, and they'll all pop up. Help yourself. And don't forget to hit the pause button, especially if you're trying to make a difference. So we've got plenty of material out there for you to actually look at and use. All right, so we're done with ergonomics. Second piece of the puzzle is suspension. Now, let's take different ethnic groups. So if we were to go to Tonga and Samoa, they generally are sizable human beings. If you're going to go to Asia, comparatively, they're a lot smaller and lighter. And if you go to Northern Europe, different build again, probably in the middle weight range. But when we buy a motorcycle, it's the same bike all over the world. And if it is all over the world, how is everybody supposed to fit that bike, either as a solo rider or as a 2-up or 2-up with luggage? So one of the things that becomes very difficult for people to understand is, I got this much travel, how do I figure out where I am? Well, there's actually a really easy way you can do that. You can follow the video about how to set sag for the forks and the shock, and also how to understand what static sag is in the shock. But at that point, that's going to involve a tape measure and some measuring and a pen and paper. And you've got to record the numbers. That gives you your starting point. After you've noted everything down with the settings that you have and the sag numbers you've got, and generally you want to be somewhere between 30 to 40 millimeters between the bike lifted up on the side stand and the suspension fully extended, the bike stood back on 2 wheels, and you sitting on it. Those are the 2 variances that we look for. At that point, you know where you're at with settings, you know what your numbers are. A lot of times the classroom doesn't really transfer over to real life, and we find our way using the knowledge we've gained. In this case, how do we take that perspective? Well, you're going to put a cable tie on the right fork leg, and it doesn't matter if you have telescopic forks or if you have upside down forks, because that cable tie will show you how much travel you're using. Now, conversely, on the back of the bike, a lot of times that shock absorber is hidden behind the engine inside the swinging arm. So it doesn't get washed and cleaned like forks do. So the cable tie will show you travel on the front, and I have yet to meet someone that tears up t-shirts, produces rags, gets out Q-tips, and meticulously cleans their rear shock. It just doesn't happen. It gets covered in road grime. It gets covered in chain lube and debris and dirt. And so the beauty of the shock shaft, which is the silver piece that comes down out of the shock body, that will be dirty, or it will be clean, or it will be a mix of both. So using your eyes can show you how much travel am I using via the zip tie and what's dirty and what's clean in the back. Very unscientific. But at this point, you've got your starting point. So for example, if you've got everything done, you're going for your average ride and you come back and the entire silver shock shaft is 100% clean, what happened? Well, you bottomed your suspension out because what was dirty before has now been wiped away. Same is true of the cable tie. How much travel did I use? We'll go look at it. The problem with assessing that while you're riding is very few of us, unless you really take the time, can tell the difference between soft suspension and hard suspension. Because when it's at the extreme, they both feel identical. So simply using your eyes and allowing yourself to visually check where you're at tells you empirically, non-negotiable, exactly where you're at. So the part there is now you have an idea that this is how I ride. And the settings, obviously the back is all clean and it wasn't before. So I need to make the back stiffer. Depending on what you're given and depending on the price of the motorcycle, you may be able to change that with just preload. You may not be able to change that at all, or your shock may be fully adjustable for preload compression rebound. And if you're really lucky, actually making the shock longer or shorter, which are called ride height. At that point, now we're going in. Now we can make a difference. Now we can start setting the bike up for you, the way you ride on your roads at your pace. And as you get time with a motorcycle, you generally ride it faster. So about every 1,500 miles, we need a track day. What does that mean? That means focus. As soon as somebody says track, think. So what we need is a test ride. We need to go evaluate our motorcycle travel and see, now that we're down the road 1,500 miles, am I riding it better? Am I riding it better? And therefore going through the corners, I'm actually going a little quicker than I was before. And what that will tell you is I'm using more travel. Well, if you don't periodically check that and you're using more travel and you're getting to maximum, do you want to roll the dice? Or would you prefer to assess you and your motorcycle periodically, regularly, to make sure that the bike never goes behind you in settings, but the bike is always in front of you, so that you can continue to learn, continue to improve, raise your level of safety up substantially. And should we find ourselves in a crisis situation, that the bike will respond far, far better and give us way better odds of staying on it and avoiding the crisis situation. So the other part of the puzzle then becomes, yes, we evolve, we get better. And in getting better, the motorcycle has to stay ahead of us. And that's the purpose of the test ride periodically. Once you're done with the test ride, you can cut the cable tie off the front forks. You can reassess the shock. Now, for some people, it's very difficult to actually see with the shock. So one of the tricks I tell people that is very useful is to spray a little bit of something onto that silver shock shaft and let it dry. So WD-40 is always popular because it's available worldwide and it's really simple to use. One of the ingenious things somebody did was actually use a tiny bit of spray oil that you would put in a frying pan and put that on the shock shaft. In both cases, both those fluids attract dust. So when the fork travels, you get your dust ring. And in getting the dust ring, you can assess instantly where you are in the travel. So, is that worth doing? Yes. Is it worth doing regularly? No, it's mandatory. Especially as our braking skill increases, the amount of travel we use is going to continue to get greater. So we really need to keep, because we have only two wheels and we are completely vulnerable. Very, very good settings for us. The video, where do my forks bottom out, is probably one of the better videos for you to understand this concept, because it goes into a lot more depth and it shows you how to get that process done for both upside down forks and for telescopic forks. Doing that and setting that bike correctly makes it so much easier to ride when you're set to your weight. Let's briefly cover two-up riding, because a lot of people do enjoy that, and maybe throw some luggage on. If you found the settings for you, then you put weight back here, then that's going to change the leverage on the shock. It may also actually extend the front, because the shock becomes the fulcrum and lifts the front up. So when you put a passenger on, you have to do the sag setting again, get everything correct to compensate for the passenger and the weight that's behind us now. And we also have to add 4 PSI to each tire. It's pretty obvious why in the rear, because of all that weight. We need to get more air in the tire so it's better supported. But what happens when you brake? Everything at the back of the bike comes forward. And so what happens to the front tire? It pancakes. So both tires need to have higher pressure so that when you're braking, your passenger doesn't go ahead and meet you, because that weight transfer is too fast. The front tire collapses and it brings them with it. So at that point, that covers a little bit of two-up as well and gets you in the ballpark as really what you should be considering for settings and pressures in regards to that. Again, not difficult. If you have a couple of simple tools, sometimes shocks are adjustable by hand or by Allen, but make the effort to get your bike correct for you. A bike that sits flat or has a very, very slight bias forward will do anything you ask of it if those settings are correct. This won't turn. And even off the showroom floor, if you're a certain weight, are you riding this right now? Are you all choppered out? Because you haven't really put the tape measure on it to see. The other part about being choppered out is your forks are up in the air and the front doesn't have a whole lot of grip. So when you're riding, do you have to wait to put the throttle on until the corner's over? And if you do, then there's a problem, because the bike is demanding that we modify our behavior to the settings that are in it currently. And that can all get fixed. The opposite is true, where the front is extremely soft and the back is extremely stiff. Then when you want the bike to turn, you barely think about it and it turns, then that's wrong, because the bike is making you catch up to its geometry. And again, if the zip tie gets buried all the way down and you're riding like this, then where's all the stress on you physically? You're holding yourself up with your arms and shoulders. Your hands are gripping to keep you locked so you're not smashed into the tank all the time. So when you go for your ride today or tomorrow or Sunday, go ride, get to the road you know, and then on that road, how hard are you working? In other words, how much is the bike demanding you ride it a certain way? And that's a great way to start to see what you have, then make some changes and go do that road again at the same pace and see how your energy expenditure is depleted by 30 to 60% if you've got your ergonomics correct, and then you've got your suspension settings for sag correct as well. So at that point, now we're bringing this motorcycle to us. It's getting to be part of us because it's set up the way we want it. And in doing that, we can physically relax. I want to turn Done. That's it. Instead of turn, let go. When you go back to your bike, take a look at your left handlebar grip. See if your finger marks are embedded into the grip. And if they are, you are working far, far, far too hard to get the motorcycle to do what you want it to do. And that is not a teamwork situation. That is 100% dysfunctional. So hopefully that's given you a couple of clues and bits and pieces in regards to ergonomics and suspension. So now let's have the third question, Brittany, please. Let's see what the answers come now for our topic. So, you have a minute again to respond and take a look at this and see where you're at. One of the parts here is that as we evolve, the other piece you need to understand is we age differently. So, I, after 30 years of playing rugby to a very high level, am physically deformed. And that means that I have to compensate for all of those fun things I did over the 30 years and change my ergonomics to fit my asymmetry. The other part of when I was younger and competing in track and field with long jump and triple jump, I actually gave myself a little bit of scoliosis as well. So not only are my shoulders offset, this left arm will not go straight, I'm also twisted. So one of the problems that means is that my handlebars have to be in two different positions, let's say a sport bike. My right bar is further forward and my left bar is closer to me. Now on my race bike, that's mandatory. And if we're going to the track or we're racing, your ergonomics piece of the puzzle has to be 100% accurate. The other problem I face is if I'm riding a standard bike and my New Zealand bike is a Tracer GT, quite often, about every 15, 20 minutes, I have to take my left hand off the bar because I'm twisted. And in being twisted, I am really in pain. What I ideally need, if the handlebar was straight across like this, is one bar here, and then I need to bend the other side of the bar back to there. That would be my perfect handlebar for me, due to all the fun I had as a teenager and a young man loving sports and being competitive. Now, there's a natural process to asymmetry as we age. And in doing that asymmetry, take care of yourself and honor who you are. So, as the poll, let's see, where are we? Not at all. Okay. So we've got some answers there. So let's get into settings. And that is generally referred to as damping. Now in cheap bikes like Ninja 400s, 300s, SV650s, and many other motorcycles, when you look at the fork cap is blank. When you look at the bottom of the fork, there's nothing there at all. And in looking at the bottom of the fork, we're trying to see if there's any screws or Allens that we can play with. Now, a lot of times it will tell you in your owner's manual, and 9 times out of 10, that owner's manual is stuffed away in a cupboard somewhere and probably covered in spider webs. Not all the time, but commonly, because our first instinct is to go to it and get to it and let's see. Fortunately now with the owner's manuals, they're getting to be really, really well written, giving us pictures, giving us information, and giving us stock settings. So at that point, have you checked where your settings are? Do you know if, for example, we all have 2 front forks, are the settings in each leg 100% the same for each adjuster? Because if they're not, what's going to happen with the fork action? It's going to be different, right? And so your bike is going to do that to your shoulders. And what are you going to do? You're going to fight it, and you're going to get tired, and you're going to get pain, and your hands hurt. So if you have settings on your motorcycle forks, then they need to be the same. So there's very different designs out there. Some have 10 COM, C, R. Some have damping on the top of one fork cap and a spring adjuster on the other. Some have spring adjusters and rebound screws on the top and compression screws at the bottom. Some have spring in the right leg, damping in the left leg. Some have compression in one leg, rebound in one leg. We're very fortunate to have so much technology available to us that it now requires us to do the reading. In that manual, stock settings are for who? Have you ever read in a manual that with that stock setting, the weight of the rider, the ability of the rider, the speed they rode at, the type of roads they have ridden, what altitude were they at, how long did they ride it for? All really important information for us to have context about what those settings actually mean. And the part there is, we're all different. We're all completely different. I am probably the slowest guy you'll ever meet riding on the street because I go to the track. And I am incredibly happy being at the track because everybody's going the same way. We're riding with similar riders. I feel so much happier and safer at the track than I do on the road. So knowing that, again, as you evolve, would you pay more attention to those settings and use the settings so that you are keeping your bike, again, ahead of you just that little bit, so that coming into a crisis, you're in much better shape. So hydraulics is basically oil. Let me ask you this question. Would you leave your engine oil in 20, 30,000 miles? I know if you had a stick, you'd be hitting me with it. So, as your suspension is the only thing that keeps you upright and balanced and still, what's the service interval for your forks and your shock? Have you actually looked at that? And if you have, and there's no black dot that says you have to do it by X time, with this new perspective, does that make sense? So one of the things I try to do is ask you to look at things with a different set of eyes. If you question everything, you tend to find a different answer. And if you choose to make the bike your own, then the servicing and maintenance of the suspension has to increase because oil wears out. And what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Many here know what a lava lamp is. So if you have not changed your fork oil, and for example, it is over 15,000 miles, in the morning, it is thick, heavy oil when it's cold. And then when you ride, the further and longer you ride, especially if they're bumpy roads, that oil just gets broken apart. And then all of a sudden, the bumps seem to get smoother. And if the bumps get smoother, that means that oil viscosity is getting thinner, right? So now ride for another hour. And all of a sudden, now that viscosity has changed to something similar to tap water. And all of a sudden, the bumps are big and hard and bang and boom. All of that is a function of the oil in the forks and the shock being too old. And it needs to be replaced. Now, servicing forks and picking the correct oil is difficult because you need some equipment, you need some stands, and generally, you depend on the shop to get that work done, and choose the right viscosity. So the right viscosity is what the book says, right, in the service manual, because that's what the OEM provides for all the mechanics and technicians to follow to the letter. Sometimes it might be better to use a thicker oil. Let's take a great example, the Ninja 400. Basic suspension called damping rod that's been around for decades. And in that oil goes through holes and it gets beaten to death. So if you are, let's say, 50 kilos, 120 pounds, that fork oil may last you, the OEM fork oil, 5,000 miles, that's it. And then you'll start getting this as you go down the road, and it won't stop because the oil gets so thin, it can't control this movement. So at that point, you would jump up to heavier oil, going from 10 weight to 15 weight. Now that fork oil has control for more miles, which if you have more control, what happens here? You relax. And in relaxing, what that gives you then is confidence to ride the bike well. And instead of holding on, you can enjoy the ride. So servicing of forks and shocks is very important. All forks can be serviced, not all shocks can. So you've got to look in your service manual to see if it is. If it is not, don't just take that for granted. Oh, there's nothing in there. Go look at it. Does it have a cylinder attached to the body? And if there's a cylinder attached to the body, then that probably means it's serviceable. If you're not sure, please contact your local suspension professional and ask them for their guidance as to whether it is or is not serviceable. Very few dealerships service motorcycle shops. All dirt bike shops service motorcycle shocks if they are serviceable. So if you're not sure, dirt bike shops, suspension professionals will tell you if that shock is serviceable or not. And at that point, what's your usual interval? Well, it's not a bad idea to service your forks and shock every 8 to 10,000 miles or 14 to 16,000 kilometers. If we depend on our suspension to keep us balanced, and when we're in the corner, minimize the risk of going out of control, is servicing your suspension and therefore guaranteeing grip and stability worth far more to you than an ECU reflash and expensive exhaust? Just asking. So at that point, there's a question we should always ask ourselves. If there's no dot to service the forks and the shock, make one. And if you're unsure about what to do and how to do it in terms of oil viscosity and choice, there is videos on that we provide for you to resource and use. And of course, if you're stuck, you can always contact me for help. All right, last question, please, Brittany, if we can get that one up. All right, so for many of you, seeing the survey so far, a lot of you are already busy doing this stuff and making differences to your motorcycle. The problem is, with suspension, it gets a little more complicated. So the part there for you to take away is something quite simple. If your motorcycle does this and you keep the oil serviced regularly, if it's non-adjustable, or if you chase rebound damping to get it to that, your motorcycle will be a dream to ride. If your motorcycle does this, you will have a huge physical problem and jump into that 100-year cycle and get rid of the bike and buy another bike. And all you're really buying is fresh fork and shock oil that doesn't allow you to be in this fight. So at that point, It's going to be a little bit of a journey, but for the bulk of you, 88%, you're already there. So the question now is, would you do those suspension tuning rides every 1,500 miles, 2,000 kilometers? Take a screwdriver or an Allen, put it in your pocket, get to your road, ride your road, and change some settings. If you write down what you do, the part that will escape you is memory. So always record a change. And what does that mean? This is where everybody goes, I'm too slow, I don't need that. Rubbish. Every single rider on the planet, irrespective of their ability, needs to do all of what we're talking about here. Period. Because the bike is dominating you, and until you reverse that situation, you will always be slow. You will also be tired, and you will also be working far too hard too much of the time. Going on to the last piece of the puzzle, where do we spend most of our money? And if we just put the blingy bits aside, bottom line is tires. That's what we go through the most. That is where we get a lot of information that is generally peer generated. These are the best tires, you should use these, they're awesome. And somebody else puts them on and says, no, those tires are rubbish. One of the things about tires is we base our decisions on peer pressure or counseling through people we trust, or through magazine articles that generally regurgitate what the manufacturer wants you to know. So let's take an example. Let's do a common bike like a Ninja 650 Twin, or an SV 650 for that matter. Both cult bikes, huge followings. Take certain tire sizes for the front wheel and the rear wheel, and they're pretty similar in terms of the sizes you're going to put on. What is never transferred to you in information is, if you were to buy a different tire of a different brand, there is absolutely no universal mold, period, that guarantees every tire made of that circumference, let's say it's a 165 60, no, 165 55 17, that every single tire you pull off the rack is going to sit perfectly at the same height. It doesn't happen. We are so blessed today to have such tremendous choice in tires. Single compound, dual compound, triple compound, sport touring. If you can think it up, there's probably a tire that meets your requirements. But what we're not educated on is that tires come in different circumferences. So many of you have probably gone through some tires and are sitting here going, yeah, I really didn't like that set of tires. So the question now becomes, why? You cannot buy a bad tire today in mainstream. You cannot. All you're getting is bad information or no information. So the bottom line is very straightforward and simple. If, and I know it's really difficult because generally a lot of dealerships don't keep tires because they're too expensive and they age out. So at that point, is the tire you're putting on higher, taller, or is it lower? What's that going to do to your motorcycle? It's going to devastate the handling of your bike. So you didn't like the tires because of what that did to your motorcycle. It may have made it steer really bad. It may have made it steer really fast. It may have lowered the bike, so transitioning the bike right to left became a lot more work. Or it may have lifted the bike up, so the bike was way too nervous and twitchy and whoa, and frightened you. So tires can be very, very challenging because we get so many different circumferences. The other part to think about is that you need to assess what it did to your motorcycle. So we can shove our hand between the rear mudguard or fender and the tire, or we can measure the gap. We can do exactly the same on the front, get our hand in there, where did it go to, or we can measure that gap as well. Either way, depends whether you like getting your hands dirty or not. At that point, when your new tires come back and you're picking your bike up and you're ready to go and you're ready to go scrub them in, the first thing you need to do before you even put the key in the ignition, before you leave the business with the motorcycle, is measure those two gaps or put your fingers or hands back in. Why? Well, what if the rear tire was smaller? Now your bike won't turn. What if the rear tire was bigger? Now your bike's going to turn really fast. What if the gaps front and rear are huge compared to what you had? Well, the bike is now lower and it's going to be a fight to ride it because you're pulling a weight from the floor and trying to move it from side to side. Or as the gap reduced on both sides, so your bike's higher. So suddenly it's way more flickable and agile and scary because it's, What's our cultural heritage with new tires? Watch me now. I got new tires, I got everything. One of the most dangerous times for us is scrubbing tires in when they're brand new. But before you go do that, could you just take a few seconds and measure what happened to your bike before you go turn the key on, turn the ignition on, and then go ride it? Not hard to do. Very simple step to take. Doesn't take much time. But at least then when you're scrubbing the bike tires in, you know what to expect. And you don't get caught out by a difference in handling, which then your conscious brain jumps onto alert, and now your reaction time just doubled or tripled because your brain's going, what? And trying to figure out what on earth is different about this motorcycle that was not there before. So hopefully, in just covering the topics, all of that makes sense for you. And my job, realistically, is a couple things. One, to inspire you. Get out there, go fit your bike to you and have a go. And if you can do this, would you please go into your local community and pay it forward by taking a tape measure and a couple of simple tools with you, and use the information I provide mostly for free, and get into your community to help riders make that step. It is incredibly difficult for a person the first time to trust me or a professional like me to change their motorcycle away from what it was. That is a huge leap of faith and trust. But all of you, and the vast majority here have, can you share that with somebody else to get them out of the rut of it's stock settings, it's fine. It's not. It isn't. Right. Do we have any questions, Brittany?
Oh, we have so many questions, Dave. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts to an audience that could only respond through poll questions. I know that that's a little bit different than what you're used to, but thank you so much for adapting to our style. In that effort, we have Q&A that I am going to facilitate by asking the questions that have been sent in from our audience and have you answer some of them live. And as a reminder for everyone who hasn't been checking out the chat, if you have specific questions for you and your motorcycle for Dave, please put them into the Q&A. We might not get to them live today, but Dave actually has the ability to send you a follow-up email throughout the rest of this week and next, and follow up with you one-on-one to really address your questions that are specific to you. So if you notice that I haven't answered or haven't asked your question to Dave during the live talk today, it's not because your question wasn't great. It's because I'm going to try and ask the questions that everyone can learn from. And if you have something specific, he will follow up with you afterwards. Hope that sounds okay to everyone. So we're going to get started. Are you ready, Dave?
Go for it.
All right. First one, I think this is probably a question that's on everyone's minds. For sag, you said that 30 to 40 millimeters is okay. Does that depend on the travel of your suspension, the total travel of your suspension, or is that a finite number for every fork?
Okay, great question. So some people need a number. So 30 to 40 millimeters is a number to start from. And knowing what that number is and using the cable tie, looking at your shock, you can then see how it corresponds to travel used. Some people actually need a percentage. So 33% is a common go-to number. And what we're trying to do there with those percentages or numbers of 30 to 40 is make sure that you don't use all your travel and your motorcycle is set flat. And in doing that, it'll ride really well, provided on the other end of the spectrum that rebound damping isn't giving you a belt buckle in an 8-second ride. So yes, what you set it to will determine how much travel you're using. And so either use the 30 to 40 mil. If you're aggressive, 30. If you're leisurely, 40. Or choose the percentage of 33, a third, and then go ride and see how much travel you use. Maybe you need 50% in the front. Maybe you need 30% in the rear, because the springs in the forks and the shock are usually never the same strength. So we set it, we go ride, and then we figure out where we need to go.
Awesome answer. That makes so much sense. Okay. Second question. This one's from Joanne. She actually had to leave the chat or the live because she is going back to work, but she says she wants to watch the recording this weekend because she has access to the vault. So I'm going to ask the question, you can answer it, and then she'll feel real special. She says, am I understanding correctly that a sign that your fork oil is old is when the front suspension responds differently from the morning you start out until the end of the day when you finish?
Hi, Joanne. Yes, 100%. And the further you go between oil changes, the bigger that difference becomes. Remember that the front forks are out in the air. So the air keeps the metal essentially ambient temperature. So the oil inside takes way, way longer to heat up than the rear shock, which is generally behind an engine and has its own heat blanket that gets it nice and toasty really quick. So you're 100% correct that if you're holding your hands tight in the morning and it's bumpy, and then all of a sudden you can relax, you are on a lava lamp. The riding is breaking the oil up, making it thinner, and then the damping and the bumps get smaller because the damping is smoother. And then if you ride far enough for long enough, then the bumps get harsh again because that oil viscosity has gone from not quite bitumen, but something quite dense to something resembling tap water. The longer you go like that, the more you're forcing the human adaptation process. And in doing so, you are beating yourself up every time you fire the bike up and turn the key off. So the question is, if you like that, then maybe the counseling might be the issue with DMT over fork oil and what that really means and why you like to get beaten up by the motorcycle. And trust me, you're not alone in that. There are millions of people that don't understand that concept. But if you have a cartridge fork, it's adjustable. If you have a damping rod fork, you've got to change it way faster, 4,000 to 5,000 miles if you use the bike all the time. So 100% correct. Figure out your service interval. And if you have a question on fork oil viscosity to choose for your specific bike and type of use, happy to answer that.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to stay on the suspension topic for a little while, and then we have a bunch of ergonomic questions as well. So everyone who's listening, just know that we're going to do some of the suspension questions first, and then we'll get into ergonomics. Okay, so Mike asked, on my rear shock, I can only get within the 40 to 35 millimeter rider sag range when I'm on the maximum or one notch down from max preload setting. When I adjust the rider sag to achieve this range, I have no static sag at all. Do I need a stiffer spring than my standard for my weight? He's measuring his sag with compression and rebound at the minimum.
Excellent question. Great data, very well presented. So if you are doing the classroom, which you are now, and your question is based on classroom and numbers, the question is, do I need to replace the spring? The answer is yes. But we have to go into the real world. So how much shock travel are you using? If you're using half the shock travel and you're working off numbers and mathematics, then the classroom is out the window and you're going to find the setting that gives you static sag, because the way you ride your bike, the speed you ride it at, and the roads you ride on just don't get enough travel into the shock. Technically, yes. Practically, I'm really sorry. You have to go ride. You have to see what's dirty and clean on the shock shaft. And if it is 100% clean when you get back, and you can absolutely know that to be true, then yes, you're going to go up the next spring size. You don't make two jumps. So for example, 8.0, 8.5, 9.0, 9.5. You don't jump 8.0 to 9.0. You pick the next spring. So hopefully that answered your question. Make sure the real world data of riding supports what you're thinking mathematically.
Okay. Mabry asked a question that I'm actually kind of intrigued with as well. How critical for a street bike are full option forks? All of the settings that you can get from full adjustment, as opposed to just simple single leg adjustment. Is it worth getting a 25 millimeter fork kit? He's hoping to improve the suspension on the bike that he has. Okay. Just so you know, it's a 2014 FZ09.
Oh, okay. Specific to you and your motorcycle, 15 weight fork coil will kill all your handling issues, period, end of story, done. That will save you a fortune, which means more riding time. How do I know? I've done plenty of them. So it's going to cost you a bottle of 15 weight fork oil. Now, the W everybody refers to as weight, I'm not going to get into it, but it's the wrong word. So at that point, there's a video called Dump and Run. You'll just pull your forks off, follow the video, hit pause as necessary. Whatever you pull out of the forks in volume, you'll put back in with fresh 15 oil. And at that point, you'll have to reset the preload and I believe rebound on that bike. That's all you've got. And you will suddenly have a motorcycle that is ridiculously better. Then you're going to have to do some geometry work on the front end, because you're going to be up here, because it's going to be firmer, travel less. So you might have to lower the front, which means the amount of gold sticking up at the top increases by 7 millimeters. With those simple changes, you've got a brand new motorcycle. Now, for the rest of the audience, if you have an SV650, I ran that with 30 weight oil and stock springs as my commuter bike, because I'm cheap and lazy. There was absolutely no need for me to spend $1,000 on a fork kit. There was no need for me to spend $200 on springs, because I did not bottom out the travel. So application and use is one thing. Now, if you're aggressive, it's something, for example, like Andriani cartridges. Great to have preload, rebound, and compression in the forks. Sure. But can you afford it? Yeah. But can you use it? Are you buying too much? Would springs and oil be a better choice, because it's simple and you don't get lost in adjustments? So make a sandwich, have a cup of tea, which is what we would do in the UK, and contemplate. Maybe meditate over the purchase and the reason for the purchase, because what you buy has to do what you want it to do. Don't overbuy. Hopefully that answers the question generally.
Dave, Mabry actually added into the text chat just now that he has seen the Dump and Run video, and yay. So I think you answered his question.
He's already gone. He left the room. He's in the garage.
Thank you for your question, Mabry. And it's really nice to know that sometimes the answer is the less expensive answer. That's fantastic. You know, that's really encouraging for us, not having to spend the most money at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
So on the level of changing your fork oil, like you were just mentioning, we have a question from Sertan, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. He said, how do the manufacturers decide on fork oil level? What is adequate or good? Just as an example, if you put new springs in your forks, some would say that you put less oil in according to the manufacturer. So why is that? And how can we as riders decide on the oil level by ourselves?
So way back in the old days, you had oil in the forks and you had a bicycle pump. And you would pump air in your forks to a certain PSI, which basically was like changing a spring. It made the fork stiffer. So when we put bigger springs in, the goal of putting bigger springs in is that when we brake, we don't bottom out. That's the function. It's steel as structure. Really is its job. So you have to know that you need them. Now, if you're changing springs, especially progressive springs, the part there is a progressive spring is a trampoline. So if you go bigger on springs, you need to go heavier on oil. And that's not specified. They don't tell you that. So one of the things to remember is that I have this spring, I'm going up to this spring, so I better bring the oil level with it if I am not able to adjust anything. If you are able to adjust, when you go for those springs, are you in the last 25% of your settings for rebound and compression? If you are, then maybe the oil you're using is too thin. So the part there is, could you upgrade to the next? So if it's 5, you would go to 7.5 and do that instead. It's a decision and a conversation to have, but are you in the last 25% of your settings is the kicker to make you think, I'll make the next jump up. And then the last piece of the puzzle, realistically, is the level or volume of oil. We don't pump our forks up anymore. That's gone. So what we do now is the volume of oil. Manufacturer recommendations, again, is for who? What ability? We don't know. So if you smash everything flat, then maybe you add 50 milliliters more oil to each leg. And then what that does is the amount of oil creates a smaller air gap. Now you can compress that air and use it so you don't bottom out. So that's called air spring effect. And there's a specific video on that for you to go and leverage. Okay.
Awesome. Yay, so much information. Okay, so another question on suspension. This one's from Deborah, the one who owns like 18 motorcycles. She says, I've had the front tire on my FJR 1300 cup out on the edges pretty badly. It's usually when she's been on a long trip with quite a bit of luggage. Her dealership service departments have told her that she hasn't been putting enough air in the tire for the load, but could suspension settings also have an effect?
Deborah, question 1, how old is your fork oil? How many miles? Question 2, on your FJR, you have rebound adjustments. Have you set them correctly? Question 3, have you monitored how much travel you're using? Because that travel and rebound will crush the tire and give you what we see in New Zealand, everybody complain about, feathering and cupping. Last question for me is pressure, not the first. So is your pressure somewhere around 40, 42 in the front to compensate for all that weight and your braking? So run through those 4 pieces with the FJR and see with the FJR, where are you at? Feathering generally, period, end of story, is rebound damping front and rear. And it's out of whack, and that's what causes the feathering.
Okay. Deborah, you have homework.
Yes. Get started. So Deborah can look up, search rebound, and all the tire wear pictures are there for her to look at, and it'll make it real easy.
Okay, perfect. Real quick before we go on, we have Darren here who says that, first of all, his daughter recognized you on the screen when she walked by. So she's getting ready to go to bed, and he wants you to say goodnight to his daughter.
Name?
He didn't write it.
No, that's awful. Good night, sweet dreams. Dream of motorcycles and dream of screwdrivers and sockets and Allen keys so you can work on them.
Perfect.
Have a nice sleep.
Okay, thank you for that. We have one more question on suspension, and it's going to kind of go into the same idea that Deborah was talking about. This is another question from Sertan. He wants to know, you mentioned how you want the motorcycle to respond like this, both front and rear at the same speeds. Do you also want that same exact reaction for an ADV bike, which is naturally up a little higher in the front, getting over obstacles?
So for an ADV or any off-road motorcycle, the front has to be up. The job of the front tire is to skip over everything. Ask me how I know.
Okay. Well,
it was a broken pelvis in 5 pieces with a handlebar that went through.
Oh, wow.
So if you, any off-road bike has to have the front dance, which means rebound damping is fast and it's got to kiss everything. The rear has to sit down and rebound has to be slow. So it provides grip and throws dirt and rocks out the back. The stance of the motorcycle has to be this way too for sag. It's got to be soft in the back, which will extend the forks. So rebound fast, rebound slow, shock soft, forks will extend. You'll have a lot more fun. With an off-road bike, your service interval, it plummets. I hope you've got a bunch of credit cards or you're working a second job, because off-road is generally hours, not tens of thousands of miles. Because just think about how much that suspension gets beat up. Suspension works so fast off-road, you're just killing the oil. So realize with any ADV bike, those service intervals are quicker, way, way quicker, probably at least half. And if you don't attend to that, then the back of the bike, you won't get the rebound slow enough. So you're going to ride around getting this. And that is awful. It's just miserable because all you're trying to do is control the entire weight of the motorcycle. So there's your answer, sir.
Awesome. And then we have a bunch of ergonomic questions. We're going to start this out by addressing Joaquim's question. He actually had a question about suspension and then a bunch about ergonomics. I'm just going to kind of preface this with saying that Joaquim is asymmetric by design because he's missing his right leg. So we're going to keep that in mind as we do a couple of his questions. The first was on suspension, and it said, when I am bottoming out, sorry, I lost it here. When I'm bottoming out, if you're adjusting preload and compression, should you also be adjusting the rebound?
So rebound is purely a function of oil age. It's nothing to do with bottoming out whatsoever. So secret bank account, joint account. Compression and preload over this way. They work together. They're a team to hold the bike up and stop it bottoming out. Rebound is over this side, and it is purely about the age of the oil and setting the screws to retain the balance here for the road or for ADV to get that set up. So it is nothing to do with bottom out at all. Okay.
Okay, so he has a bunch of ergonomics questions that are going to be very specific to him. So he understands that you're probably going to want to do some one-on-one with him afterwards, especially because he has trouble squeezing the tank and he wants to, you know, kind of really get his bike set up. But he does have a question about when it comes to your hands that I think a lot of people have, and it's using 2 fingers on the clutch. I have a tendency to squeeze or pinch my remaining fingers when having the clutch ergonomically correct. Are there any tips for fixing that?
Yeah, one of the things people don't pay attention to is the lever sits in the perch. As the clutch ages, then that gap starts to creep and increase really, really slowly. Even though at full extension, it might fit your finger correctly, that gap needs to be maintained, and that gap should be 1 to 2 millimeters with a hot clutch. If you're not paying attention to that when you actually pull, just like throttle cables, they just stretch. And if you don't continually adjust them every 3 months, roughly, then you're going to pinch your fingers. The other piece is, if it's ergonomically correct, is the bend on the lever the issue, that it's hitting your fingers? So the shape of the lever is wrong, but it fits you. So go sit on the bike and take a look at, is the lever after your finger's flat? Well, it's going to crush you. The lever after your finger should curve away. Does it? Maybe you just need to replace the lever with a different design so you can continue with 2 fingers and not hit your second, third and fourth finger.
What a great way to look at it. I would never have thought of that. I've had that problem before as well. Okay, so David wants to know, is the hand lever position different for riding on the street versus riding on the track?
100% not. You always set the levers in the braking position because that's our crisis moment. Irrespective of whether you road, track, you race, you're a professional. I set everybody up initially in exactly the same way. Symmetrical or asymmetrical doesn't matter, but it has to be when you're braking because that's where we need that structural and ergonomic integrity. So I would say no. The only caveat there is, for example, asymmetry. So I have a person with a fused wrist. I can't set him this way. I have to set him there because he can't ride the bike otherwise. There are exceptions, so those exceptions need to be honored by you, about you. So sometimes we have to do that because there's no other way to get around and allow us to ride. And in which case we increase our defensive distance so we can.
Okay.
All right.
All right. This one's a really good one for the tall riders. This anonymous attendee didn't want to give their name. I'm a tall rider, 6 feet. On my track bike, which is a 2005 GSXR 600, my knees always hurt after a day at the track. I've tried adjusting my rear sets and nothing helps. Is it his body position or the ergonomics holding him back? And you know what? I just assumed that it was a he, and I'm so sorry. It could be a she. Sorry.
Right. Very simple answer to this. Mouse pads seem to be a thing of the past. Go grab a bunch of them and shove them under your bum. Go right around the block and figure out how many pads you need to open your knee angle up. So for 6 foot, if you're a 34-inch inseam, you need somewhere between 20 and 35 millimeters of extra foam on your seat. So go find a pile of mouse pads and start building a Lego stack. Tape them to the seat with painter's tape and go around the block and find the seat height you need. The problem with that bike is the tank comes way up here, so you sit in it. The other piece of the puzzle with your rear sets, go watch the ergonomics video. Your knee and thigh have to match the angle of the tank, so you may have your rear set as low as it'll go, but it's too far back and that drags your knee down, which really stresses your hamstrings and your calf. So 2 parts there. Increase your seat height till you get comfortable. Make sure your knee isn't falling away from the line of the tank and you can get it as close as you can to match it. And 90% of your knee pain will disappear.
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Beth asked, I'm 5'7" and I ride a BMW R1200 GS. It's lowered and I feel like my knees are in my armpits like a jockey on a horse. The bars feel about 6 feet too wide. What can she do?
So you can buy any width of handlebar you want. As you're smaller in stature, maybe your shoulders are narrower too. So one of the things with handlebars is if you work on a keyboard all day, your second knuckle lines up with your shoulder, which means narrower bars. If you work with your hands all day like me, your second knuckle is comfortable about 20 to 30 mil outside your shoulder. So you need wider bars. So you measure the bars you've got, or for total width currently, then go find a piece of pipe. Stick it in. With that pipe, put your hands where you want them. That define the width of handlebar you're looking for. Now you go to the shops, go to the wall, take a tape measure. They have racks of handlebars. Find the width you need. Job done. So you may end up getting a pro taper bar or a rental bar or something like that that is non-BMW. If you're emotionally comfortable with that, that can be, and it is honestly a sticking point for some people. They have to keep everything the same. You will then go find what you need for handlebar width. and you'll roll them backwards and towards you so that your measurement from belly button to bar gets closer, because that is a long reach on that bike to go forward. So you're actually riding with your shoulder blades completely flared out all the time, which is massively exhausting. In regards to your knees being up around your armpits, that would suggest that the seat is too low because the bike's lowered. So same as somebody too tall, would you go strap a towel under the seat? Oh, sorry, on top of the seat and go right around? Now, the problem is you might not be able to get on the bike. But if you feel your knees are around your armpits, your seat's too close to the foot pegs. So somehow, some way, can you get the foot pegs lower? And sometimes you can buy a foot peg that actually bolts in the bracket and then goes down and then comes out. So do some research on foot pegs, what BMW offers for lower pegs. You may be able to find them and resolve your issue that way while not having to deal with seat height. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. You're up.
Awesome. Speaking of reaching, Lynn says, I think I get most fatigued because I'm reaching for my grips. My arms don't seem long enough, if that makes sense. What can she do?
Okay. Did she mention what type of bike?
She didn't.
Okay, so we'll go both scenarios. So handlebars will roll backwards and forwards. So that's the first thing. Try and bring, if you've got a standard bike, bring the bike back to you, but make sure they clear the tank. The second thing is, if it's a sport bike type machine, then handlebars come in three variances. One is in the middle of the front fork, one is in the front half of that front fork, and then another is in front of the fork by X amount of millimeters or inches. So when you sit on the bike, close your eyes, put your arms out, see where you want the bars to be. Well, if you're on a sport bike and they're a country mile away, we have a big problem that's not going to be solvable. So at that point, the back angle is determined by your reach to the tank, across the tank to the bars. So take a look at your handlebars. Are they in front of the fork, in the middle half of the fork, or actually physically in the middle of the fork? And which will be better? So the other way to do that is make two fists, put your knuckles against the grips on both sides. Is that more comfortable? And if it is, then you know you need to bring the bars back. So hopefully that's given you some tools to go into the garage, take a look where you can not be riding the bike, but just sit in peace and quiet and look at what you have design-wise, how it's manufactured, and then figure out practically, what do I need?
All right. And on that same note, anonymous attendee asked, where do you suggest to get custom bars made if I have arms that are different lengths due to an injury?
So if you're looking at a standard motorcycle bar, most exhaust shops bend steel. They have mandrels, they have heat, they have everything you need to bend and map it. In New Zealand, it's Gold Engineering will make you a handlebar. There is your custom bent bar. So some kind of fabrication business, doesn't matter whether they're automotive or not, they have the means and wherewithal to actually make you your own bar based on your asymmetry. So that is the best, quickest source I can guide you to, because they know exactly how to treat metal. They know the tensile strength of the bar and what you need for the handlebar to be safe in the manufacturing or stretching or bending of that bar. And then you've got your own custom bar. So as far as the US goes, or Europe, I don't know anybody that makes custom bars. They all go to fabrication shops and they bend them. Locally here, we have a guy that runs an exhaust shop and he does that to handlebars for people as well. So a little bit of inquiry and a little bit of asking, because if you never ask, you never know, should yield you a very, very quick solution to getting your own handlebar bent to exactly how you want it.
Awesome answer. And on that note, we are out of time on our Q&A. There are a bunch of questions left that Dave will be able to follow up with via email throughout the next week or so, as he is a very busy man. But for everyone who had very specific questions to you and your unique situations, your motorcycles, things that you've been struggling with, we all appreciate very much you putting your questions in. Thank you to everyone who had a question that helped a lot of us learn some new things about both ourselves and our motorcycles. Dave, thank you so much for sharing your infinite knowledge and wisdom. We always learn something new every time I watch your presentation. It's always making me think about what I can do to increase my comfort on my motorcycle so I can ride it longer. I have prepared a quick slide for everyone to see on how to get a hold of Dave. So here's where you can find him in your searches throughout specific social media or websites that you like to. It's not coming up. Of course, it's not coming up.
It's okay. Or they can Google Dave Moss and put something specific after it, like tires, suspension, ergonomics, maintenance, service, oil. There's plenty for you to get there. Brittany will get that slide up here in a second, and that will give you something. So either imprint it into your brain or grab your phone and take a picture, or better yet, because I am incredibly lazy, screenshot the image so it stays on your desktop and you have it right there and everything is good with the world.
Here we go. All right, here's how to find Dave Moss.
There you go. Screenshot it. Go. Grab the camera. Go, 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 go.
DaveMossTuning.com. Dave Moss Tuning on YouTube. On Facebook, it's just Dave Moss for some reason, you weirdo. And on Instagram, it's at Dave Moss Tuning. I want to say thank you all for joining us so much for this Rev Talk. If you enjoyed this, please consider gaining access to our virtual vault, which has 26 other videos already recorded in it from professionals of all different genres. And also keep an eye out because we are going to start doing these once a week, every week for the entire year. We're going to take a couple of weeks off for special occasions like holidays, but we're going to do this every single week. And we would love to have Dave back. He has a couple of other areas of expertise that he can share with us. So he will be a repeat offender for sure. Thank you again, Dave, for being
You're welcome.
Our first single Rev Pro, not part of the conference. Thank you for everyone for attending. I know it's Friday in the middle of the day for some of you. It's Friday evening or even Friday morning or Saturday morning for some of you. Yeah. We had people from all over the world join in on this, and that's awesome. Really what we're looking for.
It is. Thank you so much, Brittany. Awesome to spend time with you again. Look forward to seeing you soon at the track.
All right, everyone. You all have a great rest of your weekend, and we will see you at the next Rev Talks next week. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.